where the lines of global influence are being redrawn in real time. Burkina Faso has made a move that many observers first described as contradictory. After recalibrating its security partnerships eastward under President Ibrahim Traoré, the country signed a 5-year public health cooperation agreement with the United States worth up to $147 million. At the same time, Ouagadougou committed roughly $17 million of its own domestic funding and launched a presidential initiative to build 55 new medical centers across the country. Why would a government that shifted its security posture away from Western frameworks deepen cooperation with Washington in health? Why invest $12 million specifically in laboratory systems and disease surveillance in a region more associated with insurgency than epidemiology? At first glance, it looks like mixed messaging. But what if it is deliberate? What if this is not about choosing sides, but choosing sectors? When Burkina Faso adjusted its defense relationships, it did so under intense pressure. The Sahel has faced years of insurgent violence. Armed groups move across porous borders, exploit weak infrastructure, and challenge state authority in rural regions. For any government, security is existential. When existing arrangements fail to deliver stability, leaders must ask hard questions. Is the partnership effective? Does it preserve sovereignty? Is the strategy sustainable? Security partnerships are not symbolic gestures. They shape command structures, training systems, intelligence flows, and sometimes even political leverage. African leaders have historical memory of Cold War alignments, post-colonial interventions, and military agreements that blurred the line between assistance and dependency. When Burkina Faso recalibrated its security architecture, it was not necessarily rejecting one bloc in favor of another out of ideology. It was reclaiming maneuvering space. But here is where many analysts misread the moment. If the pivot were ideological, we would expect total disengagement from Western systems across the board. Diplomatic freezes, economic distancing, institutional rupture. That did not happen. Instead, a compartmentalized strategy emerged. Security was treated as one lane, health as another, infrastructure as another still. Each sector negotiated on its own terms. This is the deeper story. In geopolitics, contradiction only exists if we assume alignment must be total. For decades, African states were often viewed through a binary lens, either aligned with the West or drifting elsewhere. But multipolarity changes that equation. It allows modular engagement, cooperation in one domain without surrendering autonomy in another. That is precisely what the health agreement reflects. Under the 5-year framework, the United States may provide up to $147 million to strengthen Burkina Faso's health system. Approximately $12 million is earmarked for global health security initiatives, reinforcing laboratory capacity, upgrading disease surveillance networks, and improving outbreak detection. In a region with high cross-border movement and fragile infrastructure, early detection is not a luxury. It is national defense in another form. Epidemics destabilize economies, overwhelm institutions, and expose state fragility faster than many security threats. Laboratories function as intelligence hubs. Data systems create situational awareness. Surveillance networks offer early warning. In that sense, health capacity reinforces sovereignty just as surely as military readiness. But the most important detail is not the size of Washington's potential contribution. It is Burkina Faso's simultaneous decision to raise roughly $17 million in domestic health spending. That shift changes the geometry of influence. Historically, many health systems across parts of Africa leaned heavily on donor funding. When financial weight sits externally, influence often follows. Priorities may be shaped by donor frameworks. Reporting templates reflect outside expectations. Over time, institutions adapt to external rhythms rather than domestic agendas. Co-financing alters that balance. When a government commits substantial internal resources alongside foreign support, it narrows asymmetry. It signals that the sector is not being outsourced. It is being reinforced through partnership, not patronage. This distinction matters. By increasing domestic health investment while engaging Washington, Burkina Faso communicates a clear message. Cooperation is welcome, but control remains internal. Then comes the presidential initiative to build 55 medical centers nationwide. This program operates parallel to the international memorandum. It is nationally driven. It expands physical access to care, particularly in underserved areas. 55 centers mean clinics closer to rural communities. They mean nurses, midwives, technicians, and supplies within reach. They mean the visible presence of the state in everyday life. Infrastructure carries psychological weight. Citizens judge governance not by diplomatic communiques, but by tangible access. A functioning clinic within reachable distance strengthens legitimacy. Legitimacy reinforces stability. In this layered approach, security diversification protects territorial integrity. Health co-financing strengthens institutional resilience. Infrastructure expansion deepens domestic legitimacy. Together, they create insulation. Global powers are accustomed to a certain rhythm. Funding creates access. Access creates leverage. It is rarely stated openly, but it has shaped international engagement for generations. When a country compartmentalizes sectors and co-finances development, that rhythm is disrupted. Influence can no longer be assumed to expand automatically through finance. It must be negotiated. Burkina Faso's strategy reduces cascading vulnerability. Pressure in one domain does not automatically spill into another. Security recalibration does not require diplomatic hostility in health. Health cooperation does not reverse defense diversification. This is not confrontation. It is boundary setting. There's also a generational shift behind this posture. African youth grew up watching structural adjustment programs shrink public sectors. They saw loans outlive administrations. They witnessed health crises expose over-reliance on external supply chains. For this generation, multipolarity is not theory, it is lived reality. Multiple global centers of power mean options. Options create leverage. Leverage strengthens bargaining power. From that perspective, Burkina Faso's approach is not contradictory. It is pragmatic. It recognizes that sovereignty today is not isolation. It is the ability to choose partnerships selectively from a position of clarity about national priorities. Selective engagement is power. The steering wheel metaphor is useful here. A driver may accept passengers, but the route remains internally determined. When domestic funding rises, when infrastructure is nationally initiated, when partnerships are segmented rather than bundled, the route becomes harder to redirect from outside. Durability, however, depends on consistency. One agreement does not transform a system. One pivot does not erase decades of structural imbalance. But patterns matter. If laboratories strengthened under this cooperation become permanent national assets, Burkina Faso gains epidemiological intelligence that cannot be withdrawn with a diplomatic disagreement. If the 55 medical centers become sustainably staffed and supplied, healthcare access expands beyond the lifespan of any memorandum. If domestic health spending continues to rise alongside diversified engagement, autonomy deepens incrementally. This is how institutional sovereignty is built, layer by layer. The older model of engagement often relied on concentration. Concentrated funding, concentrated training, concentrated influence. When one node weakened, the entire structure trembled. The emerging model distributes risk. Distributed systems are harder to pressure, harder to isolate, harder to dominate. But sustainability requires discipline. Domestic investment must remain steady. Institutions must mature beyond personalities. Clinics must be maintained, not merely inaugurated. Laboratories must retain skilled staff. Supply chains must function consistently. Blueprints fail when execution fragments. The opportunity here is not symbolic defiance. It is institutional strengthening. And institutional strength determines whether sovereignty is durable or rhetorical. There's also a broader continental implication. If other African states observe that segmented engagement allows flexibility without isolation, the model could spread. Security partnerships could diversify without collapsing diplomatic bridges. Health systems could expand through co-financing rather than dependency. Sector-by-sector autonomy could become normalized. If that normalization occurs, global powers will adapt. Instead of expecting comprehensive alignment, they will negotiate specific domains. Influence will hinge on mutual benefit rather than inherited hierarchy. This is not inherently anti-Western, nor is it automatically pro-anyone else. It is pro-balance. And balance, practiced consistently, matures into leverage. Burkina Faso's move suggests that Africa does not need to withdraw from the global system to assert itself. It can restructure how it participates in it. It can pivot in security while partnering in health. It can diversify defense ties while co-financing domestic development. It can insulate sectors to reduce overexposure. That is the quiet shift underway. The true measure of this moment will not be the headline number, $147 million, nor the symbolism of a pivot eastward. It will be whether systems built today remain functional tomorrow, whether laboratories, clinics, and budgets become embedded parts of national capacity, whether sovereignty evolves from rhetoric into architecture. If Africa continues building systems that no single external actor can unplug, the old dynamics of dependence may gradually lose relevance. And perhaps that is the real story. Not contradiction, but calibration. Not rebellion, but restructuring. Not choosing sides, but choosing sectors. The question now is whether this layered approach becomes a lasting blueprint, not just for Burkina Faso, but for a continent navigating a multipolar world on its own terms.